Welcome. Today, we're undertaking a rigorous analysis of the source material documenting the life, crimes, and eventual execution of Theodore Robert Bundy.
Hmm.
The information we have provides a deep, fact-based examination of, well, one of America's most infamous serial killers, and it really demands our full attention to the facts.
Our mission in this session is pretty precise: to organize and synthesize all of this extensive documentation.
Right.
We want to deliver a clear, granular understanding of how Bundy managed to operate, virtually undetected across 7 U.S. states.
7 states:
Hmm.
Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, California, and Florida.
Exactly. And all of that over a 4-year period between 1974 and 1978. It's just critical that as we go through this difficult material, we maintain sensitivity.
Of course.
We have to acknowledge the profound gravity of this subject and the devastating loss and suffering endured by the victims and their families.
We'll trace the evolution of his actions, starting with the deeply rooted ambiguities of his early life. Then we'll move into the highly calculated and frankly chilling methods of abduction he perfected,
And then his captures and escapes.
detailing his dramatic captures and 2 highly public escapes, and then culminating in the final moments of his execution and the psychological assessments that attempted and often struggled to define his pathology.
It's a complex and heavy examination, but it's one that's necessary for a complete understanding of the pattern that's established in these sources.
Let's begin at the very start, because the foundation of Bundy's identity was, well, it was built on concealment.
Yep.
He was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24th, 1946.
At the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont.
And even the most basic detail, his paternity, is just shrouded in intentional secrecy and conflicting reports.
Indeed. The official narrative we find in the sources is murky. His original birth certificate reportedly assigned paternity to a salesman named Lloyd Marshall. But then other copies listed his father as unknown. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, she told one story about meeting a veteran named Jack Worthington, who later abandoned her.
So already multiple stories.
Right. But the mystery deepens because some family members speculated that Bundy was the result of an incestuous relationship with Louise's own father, Samuel Cowell, his maternal grandfather.
And what do the sources say about that?
Well, forensic psychiatrist Dorothy Otnow Lewis later claimed a DNA test excluded Samuel as the father. But the very existence of this rumor highlights the fraught and dishonest environment of his birth.
And that secrecy, it wasn't just confined to the birth certificate. It became really the central pillar of his early existence. To avoid the significant social stigma attached to illegitimacy in the 1940s, his maternal grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, raised him in their Philadelphia home as their son.
And his biological mother, Louise, was presented to young Ted as his older sister.
Imagine discovering that.
Well, the sources are clear that the moment he discovered the truth seems to have been profoundly destabilizing, although Bundy himself gave, highly divergent recollections of the event.
Like what?
To one girlfriend, he claimed a cousin showed him the birth certificate and called him a bastard. But he told his biographers, Michaud and Ainsworth, that he found the certificate himself.
So he couldn't even keep that story straight.
No. The most credible account seems to come from Anne Rule, who knew him well. She suggests he didn't uncover the truth until around 1969, when he finally located the original birth record in Vermont.
What's consistent, though, regardless of how he found out, is the immense impact and the lifelong resentment that resulted from it.
Oh, absolutely. The sources indicate he expressed deep bitterness toward his mother for concealing the truth of his parentage, for the shame of his illegitimacy, and for forcing him to discover this foundational fact about himself so late in life.
This foundation of identity confusion, secrecy, and what he saw as a profound betrayal, it seems absolutely central to the psychological groundwork for everything that came later.
That history immediately complicates any attempt to understand his childhood. When you examine his later accounts of his early years, you see immediate conflict.
How so?
Early on, he spoke warmly of his grandfather Samuel. He said he identified with, respected, and clung to him. That was the narrative he maintained with Anne Rule.
Okay, so a positive figure in his life.
At first. But in 1987, years later, when he was trying to secure appeals, he gave a drastically different narrative to his attorneys and family.
A complete reversal.
A complete one. He claimed Samuel was a tyrannical bully who beat his wife and dogs, sometimes swinging neighborhood cats by their tails, and expressed deep racist and xenophobic attitudes.
And this is a classic pattern we see in Well, in psychopathic narratives, the
Right.
reconstruction of the past to externalize all the blame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those accusations against Samuel are starkly contrasted by nearly everyone else who knew the family. Locals in Roxborough remembered Samuel as a fine man.
So other people didn't see him that way at all.
Not at all. One cousin dismissed the characterization of Sam being an abusive alcoholic as a desperate attempt by Bundy to justify his own horrific actions, emphasizing that Samuel's daughters loved him dearly.
And we see the same contradiction applied to his grandmother, Eleanor.
We do. Bundy described her as timid and obedient, claiming she frequently underwent electroshock therapy for depression.
But his aunt had a different story.
Completely. His Aunt Audrey stated that Eleanor suffered from a debilitating physical illness, a stroke linked to her weight, and was not mentally ill in the way Bundy described.
So it makes it challenging, if not, impossible, to rely solely on Bundy's version of his childhood environment.
It seems custom-made to deflect responsibility from his own internal pathology.
In 1950, his mother, Louise, changed her surname to Nelson and moved with young Ted to Tacoma, Washington. She eventually married Johnny Culpeper Bundy, a hospital cook, in 1951.
And he formally adopted Ted.
The source material notes that while Johnny genuinely tried to include his adopted son in activities like camping and fishing, Ted remained psychologically distant.
He later complained that Johnny was not his real father, wasn't very bright, and didn't make much money.
So another focal point for his scorn. The lack of success and high ambition in his adoptive father, it links back to this theme of status and aspiration that really defined his adult life.
And beyond the complex family dynamic, the source material documents specific instances of highly disturbing behavior. And this goes back to his earliest years in Tacoma.
Right, there's that story from his aunt.
Louise's youngest sister, Julia Cowell. She recounted a truly unsettling anecdote. Waking from a nap to find 3-year-old Bundy standing silently by her bed, smiling, surrounded by a collection of knives he had taken from the kitchen.
3 years old. That is chilling.
The escalation of violent behavior continued. A childhood neighbor, Sandy Holden, recalled him as a mean-spirited kid who enjoyed inflicting pain and fear.
And she confirmed the animal cruelty.
Yes, including hanging a stray cat from a clothesline and setting it on fire with lighter fluid. The sources also mentioned he built makeshift punji traps using sharpened sticks around his neighborhood.
Which injured at least one young girl.
And perhaps most tellingly, he would lure younger children into the woods, force them to strip, and then terrorize them. He allegedly described hearing their fearful screams from blocks away.
Yet later accounts of his teenage years present this manufactured exterior.
Completely. Bundy told biographers he chose to be alone as an adolescent because he didn't know what underlay social interactions. It paints him as a misunderstood introvert.
But that's not what his classmates said.
No. His classmates from Woodrow Wilson High told Ann Rule that he was, in fact, well-known and well-liked. They described him as a medium-sized fish in a large pond.
The only acknowledged social difficulty was intense teasing in junior high, which led him to avoid open showers.
Which maybe reinforces the secrecy he maintained regarding his body and his internal life.
The contrast here is the most crucial part of understanding the whole picture. You have this hidden pathology, including his admitted consumption of violent pornographic literature, the window peeping, the early sadistic acts.
Versus the charming, sophisticated outward facade.
He was building this persona deliberately. One psychologist noted that his fantasies were not just of sex, but of being someone else, someone important and successful.
And the decisive moment for the collapse of this facade and the subsequent emergence of his criminal behavior, it seems firmly anchored around his college years and a specific romantic rejection.
Right. After a brief period at the University of Puget Sound, he transferred to the University of Washington, or UW, in 1967.
And there, he began a relationship with a high-status classmate, Diane Edwards, who was referred to by various pseudonyms in the source literature.
And Bundy repeatedly described her as the only woman I ever really loved.
The sources indicate Edwards was wealthy, sophisticated, and crucially ambitious. And she ended the relationship in early 1968.
And why?
Precisely because she perceived Bundy as immature, directionless, and lacking the ambition she sought in a partner.
And this rejection hit him exceptionally hard.
It did. Forensic psychiatrist Dorothy Otnow-Lewis later characterized this emotional crisis as probably the pivotal time in his development, suggesting it was the catalyst that accelerated the development of his dangerous, hidden personality.
Following the breakup, his academic ambition just cratered. He dropped out of college, worked minimum wage jobs, traveled east.
He briefly attended Temple University and critically spent time in New York City where he immersed himself in violent pornographic literature while obsessing over the rejection.
It sounds like a psychological fermentation process where his resentment crystallized and his darker fantasies found reinforcement.
That's a good way to put it. But by the fall of 1969, he returned to Washington with renewed focus. He re-enrolled at UW and simultaneously met Elizabeth Klopfer.
A single mother whom he dated tumultuously for the next several years, even through his initial incarceration.
And the sources contain deeply disturbing material regarding this period, particularly from Klopfer's daughter, Molly, who was just 3 when they met.
What did she recall?
Molly later recalled a series of incidents starting around age 7, including Bundy hitting her, indecent exposure, and inappropriate sexual touching that he disguised as games.
Horrifying. And at the same time, the public facade grew stronger than ever.
It did. He excelled in his public life. He re-enrolled as a psychology major and became an honor student.
And he worked at the Seattle Suicide Hotline Crisis Center alongside Ann Rule,
who remembered him as kind, solicitous, and empathetic. This public service credential became a key part of his cover.
Furthermore, he became deeply involved in Republican politics, working for Governor Daniel J. Evans's re-election campaign.
And he received an appointment to the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. He cultivated the image of being smart, aggressive, and a believer in the system.
So now, having achieved the success and status that Diane Edwards had demanded of him years earlier, he executed what appears to be a calculated act of revenge.
He rekindled the romance with Edwards during the summer of 1973. They discussed marriage. He continued courting her even after starting at the University of Puget Sound Law School that fall.
And all this time, neither Edwards nor Klopfer, whom he was still dating, knew the other existed.
That's right. The definitive end of the Edwards relationship came in January 1974. With no warning, Bundy abruptly cut off all contact.
And when she finally reached him by phone and confronted him about it,
his response was delivered in a flat, calm, and devastating denial. "Diane, I have no idea what you mean." And then he hung up the phone.
He later admitted, "I just wanted to prove to myself that I could have married her," which confirms the calculated nature of the whole thing.
Yes. Edwards concluded that his entire elaborate performance had been a deliberate, cruel form of revenge, waiting until he was successful enough to make her fall back in love with him, only to inflict the same rejection upon her that she had inflicted on him 5 years prior.
And the sources note, chillingly, that the first confirmed violent attack occurred shortly after this definitive break. By April 1974, he had stopped attending law school entirely. It was a complete shift in his focus.
And that brings us directly to January 1974 and the beginning of the Washington and Oregon crime spree. We start with the first known victim, 18-year-old Karen Sparks, a UW student.
She was attacked in her basement apartment shortly after midnight on January 4th.
And this was a brutal, non-fatal attack. Bundy bludgeoned Sparks with a metal rod reportedly taken from her bed frame and sexually assaulted her with the same rod,
resulting in horrific internal injuries and a ruptured bladder. Though she survived after being unconscious for 10 days, it's so important to acknowledge the permanent and life-altering suffering she endured.
Permanent brain damage, significant loss of vision and hearing, a truly devastating outcome.
From this point, the escalation was rapid. Throughout the first half of 1974, female college students in the Seattle area began disappearing at a frightening rate.
These victims included 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy, abducted from her basement room on February 1st, then Donna Gail Manson, a 19-year-old from Evergreen State College who disappeared in March,
whose skull Bundy later claimed he burned in his girlfriend's fireplace until it was reduced down to the last ash. Just monstrous.
And then 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt, abducted in mid-April from Central Washington State College.
It was during this phase that the distinct signature of his modus operandi began to emerge, right?
Yes. 2 female Central Washington students later told police about encountering a man wearing a fake arm sling, or cast, asking for help carrying books or a sailboat to his brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle.
This ruse, exploiting the victim's inherent willingness to help someone seemingly injured, it became his hallmark method for luring women.
The spree continued south and across jurisdictions. In May, 22-year-old Roberta Kathleen Parks vanished from Oregon State University in Corvallis.
And Bundy's account of that is just shocking. He claimed he persuaded her to go with him to a bar, and once she got into his car, he tied and gagged her, raping her twice on the journey back to Washington, where he killed her.
Then in June, Brenda Carol Ball, 22, disappeared after leaving a tavern near the Seattle-Tacoma airport. She was last seen talking to a brown-haired man with his arm in a sling.
Investigators quickly recognized the alarming commonalities among the victims. Young, attractive white college students with long hair parted in the middle,
The profile was strikingly similar to Diane Edwards.
suggesting his crimes were a perverse expression of the resentment and possessiveness stemming from that pivotal rejection. But the scarcity of physical evidence really hampered the police efforts.
Bundy's audacity grew exponentially. In the early hours of June 11th, 18-year-old Jorgen Hawkins vanished from a brightly lit alley behind her sorority house near the University of Washington.
And he later detailed this to Detective Robert Keppel. He lured Hawkins to his car, knocked her unconscious with a crowbar, drove her to Issaquah, strangled her, and then spent the entire night with her body.
And here's where his incredible nerve truly shows. The very next afternoon, he returned to the alley.
While a major crime scene investigation was actively underway.
Exactly. And he located and gathered Hawkins' earrings and one of her shoes from the adjoining parking lot and then departed completely unobserved.
Keppel described this feat as so brazen that it astonishes police even today.
And Bundy later admitted he revisited Hawkins' remains on 3 separate occasions, which really emphasizes that motive of possession.
The peak of his Washington activity in terms of sheer nerve was the mass abduction at Lake Sammamish State Park on July 14, 1974.
23-year-old Janice Ann Ott and 19-year-old Denise Marie Naslund were taken in broad daylight from a crowded public beach.
And witnesses described an attractive young man, Ted, dressed in a white tennis outfit, wearing an arm sling, asking for assistance unloading a sailboat from his tan Volkswagen Beetle.
Multiple witnesses corroborated the MO.
The psychological cruelty here is hard to fathom. He later told Michaud and Hagmeyer that Ott was still alive when he returned with Naslund,
suggesting he forced one victim to watch the assault and murder of the other, although he did later deny that specific claim just before his execution.
During this entire escalation, there's that chilling conflict of interest. He was employed in Olympia as the assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee,
writing a pamphlet on rape prevention.
And later he worked at the Department of Emergency Services, the DES, which was actively coordinating the search for the missing women.
The sources suggest this gave him critical first-hand knowledge of police procedures, information bottlenecks, and jurisdiction gaps, allowing him to stay steps ahead of investigators.
Due to the high number of disappearances, King County Police managed to compile a comprehensive composite sketch and a detailed description of the suspect and his Volkswagen.
And this is where the early warnings came into play. Elizabeth Clofer, Ann Rule, a DES employee, and a UW professor all recognized the profile and reported Bundy as a possible suspect.
But the detectives, who were overwhelmed with tips receiving up to 200 per day, they initially dismissed the idea that a clean-cut law student with no adult criminal record could possibly be the perpetrator.
The horrific findings soon followed. On September 6, the skeletal remains of Ott and Naslund were found near Issaquah. Bundy later confirmed an extra femur and vertebrae found there belonged to Hawkins.
And 6 months later, the skulls and mandibles of Healy, Rancourt, Parks, and Ball were discovered on Taylor Mountain, a location where Bundy frequently hiked,
indicating he used familiar wilderness areas as disposal sites.
So by August 1974, Bundy was feeling the pressure from the increasing number of tips and the dissemination of the composite sketch.
So he moved to Salt Lake City, ostensibly to attend the University of Utah Law School. He quickly expressed profound disappointment, finding the classes completely incomprehensible.
A failure he couldn't reconcile with his successfully ambitious facade. This academic collapse, combined with the heat from Washington, fueled the next phase of his crime spree.
The new string of homicides began the following month in Utah. On October 2, he abducted 16-year-old Nancy Wilcoxon Holiday, forcing her into his vehicle at knife point. Her remains were never recovered.
The victims became personal targets for the local community. On October 18th, Melissa Ann Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of the Midvale police chief, disappeared.
Her nude body was found 9 days later. Then on Halloween, 17-year-old Laura Ann Name disappeared. Her nude body was found on Thanksgiving Day. Both victims had suffered extreme violence: beaten, raped, sodomized, and strangled with nylon stockings.
The sources indicate that post-mortem rituals became a more pronounced element of the Utah murders.
Yes. Bundy later described shampooing Ames' hair and applying makeup to Smith's lifeless face. He told investigators, "If you've got time, they can be anything you want them to be,"
confirming the level of control and depersonalization he sought. And then a crucial non-fatal encounter provided police with a clear link between the disappearing women.
On November 8, 1974, 18-year-old Carol Derange was approached by Bundy using the office of Rosalind Ruse at a shopping mall. He claimed to be investigating her car break-in and asked her to accompany him to the station.
Her escape was just sheer luck, possible only because he inadvertently fastened both of her handcuffs to the same wrist. She managed to open the car door and flee into traffic.
Later that very same evening, 17-year-old Deborah Jean Kent disappeared after leaving a high school theater production in Bountiful, 20 miles north of Murray.
And crucially, outside the auditorium, investigators found a key that unlocked the handcuffs Derange had managed to remove from her wrist,
Definitively linking the two incidents.
Throughout this Utah spree, Elizabeth Klopfer's suspicions were mounting and becoming increasingly desperate. She called King County Police again in November, then contacted the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office in December.
Repeating her deep concerns, she described mysterious items she found, including crutches, surgical gloves, a meat cleaver, and a sack of women's clothing.
And she even noted his strange, violent reaction whenever she considered cutting her long, middle-parted hair,
linking his obsessive preference to the profile of his victims.
In 1975, Bundy quickly shifted his criminal activity eastward into Colorado, demonstrating his reliance on jurisdictional borders to foil investigators.
On January 12, 23-year-old nurse Karen Eileen Campbell disappeared from a well-lit hallway at the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass Village. Her body was found a month later.
And the examination showed blows to the head that left distinctive linear groove depressions on her skull, a detail that would later prove crucial.
Just 2 months later, in Vail, 26-year-old Julie Lyle Cunningham disappeared. Bundy later detailed his ruse to Colorado investigators, confirming he approached Cunningham on crutches, asking her to help carry his ski boots to his car,
where he clubbed and handcuffed her.
Yeah.
And he admitted to driving 6 hours from Salt Lake City weeks later just to revisit her remains, again confirming that powerful motive of possession.
He continued his eastern expansion with 25-year-old Denise Lynn Oliverson, who disappeared near the Utah-Colorado border. And his movements were later corroborated by gas receipts placing him in the area that day.
The Idaho victim, 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver, highlights the increasing vulnerability of his targets. This young girl was abducted in May from a junior high school.
He raped her and, according to his confession, drowned her in the bathtub of his Holiday Inn hotel room before disposing of her body in the Snake River. It is just a terrible, terrible loss of an innocent life.
It is. The final known victim before his first arrest was 15-year-old Susan Curtis, who disappeared from the Brigham Young University campus in late June.
And while her body was never recovered, her murder was the very last one Bundy confessed to, recorded moments before he was executed years later.
Despite the vast jurisdiction hopping, Washington investigators were finally leveraging technology. They used early computer database technology, what one detective called a huge primitive machine,
to cross-reference lists of suspects, owners of brown or tan Volkswagens named Ted, and acquaintances of the victims.
And out of thousands of names, 26 turned up on 4 different lists, and Bundy was one of them. Investigators later remarked that he was literally at the top of the pile when word finally came from Utah of his initial arrest.
And that initial arrest occurred on August 16, 1975, in Granger, Utah. Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward observed Bundy driving his Volkswagen Beetle erratically in a residential area during the pre-dawn hours.
And when he tried to stop him, Bundy fled at high speed.
Hayward noticed the passenger seat had been removed and placed awkwardly on the rear seats.
The sheer volume of items found in the Volkswagen was immediately suspicious. A ski mask, a crowbar, handcuffs, rope, and an ice pick.
And Bundy's attempted explanations were spectacularly implausible. He claimed the handcuffs were found in a dumpster, and the other items were for skiing or household use.
But Detective Jerry Thompson recognized the car and the suspect's description from the Derange kidnapping and the recent tip from Klopfer.
And in the subsequent search of his apartment, police found a guide to Colorado ski resorts with a check mark precisely by the Wildwood Inn, where Karen Campbell vanished.
And a brochure advertising the high school play where Deborah Jean Kent disappeared.
The sources also mentioned Bundy, later claiming that searchers missed a hidden collection of Polaroid photographs of his victims, which he allegedly destroyed after he was released on bail, which demonstrates that motive of visual possession.
The crucial breakthrough, though, was the forensic analysis of his vehicle. After Bundy sold the Volkswagen to a teenager, FBI technicians meticulously analyzed the interior.
They discovered hair strands that were determined to be microscopically indistinguishable from samples obtained from 3 different victims, Campbell, Smith, and Derange.
And the FBI lab specialist, Robert Neal, He concluded that finding hairs from 3 different victims who had never met in one car was a coincidence of mind-boggling rarity.
It effectively sealed the case against him, even without a body. On October 2, detectives placed Bundy in a lineup. Carol Duranch immediately identified him as Officer Roseland.
Witnesses from the high school where Kent vanished also recognized him. He was formally charged with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault in the Duranch case.
He was released on $15,000 bail, paid by his parents, and returned to Seattle, where police kept him under close surveillance.
Klupfer described the unsettling reality of this, recalling the unmarked police cars starting up when they left the house, sounding like the beginning of the Indy 500.
In February 1976, Bundy stood trial for the Duranch kidnapping. Despite the strong evidence, his attorney advised him to waive his right to a jury trial due to the intense negative publicity.
Judge Stuart Hansen Jr. found Bundy guilty, and in June he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison.
With Utah secured, Colorado authorities charged him with Karen Campbell's murder, and he was transferred to Aspen in January 1977.
And while awaiting trial, Bundy, whose ego and grandiosity were now fully engaged, began plotting his first dramatic escape.
The first escape occurred on June 7, 1977. While being transported to the Pitkin County Courthouse, Bundy, acting as his own attorney, was excused from wearing shackles.
And during a recess, he asked to visit the second-story law library. He opened a window and jumped, fracturing his right ankle in the fall.
He was a fugitive for 6 days. Despite his injury, he limped through Aspen, breaking into a remote hunting cabin to steal food and a rifle.
He was recaptured when 2 officers noticed his car weaving, and the sources underscored the planning. Maps of the area where Campbell's body was found were discovered in the stolen car,
which demonstrates the deep emotional connection he maintained with his crime sites.
He was returned to jail in Glenwood Springs, and the situation became ironic. The case against him for Campbell's murder was actually starting to weaken.
Right, due to questions about the admissibility of certain evidence. A rational defendant might have realized he stood a good chance of acquittal.
But the sources suggest Bundy's pathological need for control and the grandiosity of his ego drove him to escape again. He refused to allow a legal process he didn't control to dictate his fate.
His second escape, on December 30, 1977, was even more meticulous. Over weeks, he acquired a detailed floor plan of the jail and a hacksaw blade. He lost 35 pounds to fit through a tight space.
He sawed a hole in his cell ceiling bars and wriggled into the crawl space. He manufactured a decoy body using books under a blanket to simulate himself sleeping.
And then he broke through the ceiling into the chief jailer's apartment, who was out for the evening, changed clothes, and simply walked out the front door of the jail.
He wasn't discovered missing for over 17 hours. By then, Bundy had traveled across the country through Chicago and Atlanta before arriving in Tallahassee, Florida on January 8, 1978.
He took temporary refuge by renting a room under the alias Chris Hagen. Despite his resolve to find legitimate employment and disappear, his attempts failed.
One job application required identification, forcing him to abandon an idea. Within days, he reverted to stealing money and credit cards to survive. The tension was rapidly reaching a breaking point.
The Florida spree began exactly 1 week later, in the early hours of January 15, 1978, at Florida State University's Chi Omega sorority house. This was an unprecedented level of compressed violence, taking less than 15 minutes.
2 young women, Margaret Elizabeth Bowman and Lisa Janet Levy, were murdered. Bowman was bludgeoned with oak firewood and garroted. Levy was beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted with a hair mist bottle,
sustaining deep bite marks on her left buttock and having one nipple torn.
2 other victims, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, were severely injured but thankfully survived. Kleiner suffered a shattered jaw. Chandler sustained a concussion, broken jaw, loss of teeth, and a crushed finger. The lack of witnesses is just staggering.
It is. We hold great sympathy for all the Chi Omega victims and survivors who suffered through this sudden and terrible violence. Bundy then moved 8 blocks away and attacked 21-year-old FSU student Cheryl Thomas.
She suffered a fractured jaw and skull, leaving her with permanent deafness in her left ear and debilitating equilibrium damage.
But the physical evidence found here was monumental. A semen stain and a pantyhose mask containing hair samples similar to Bundy's were recovered from her bed, providing vital forensic leads.
His final known victim was 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach, abducted on February 9, 1978 from Lake City Junior High.
7 weeks later, her partially mummified remains were found. Forensic experts determined her throat had been cut and her genitals mutilated with a knife, a further escalation in sadistic violence.
The evidence in the Leach case was highly incriminating. Clothing fibers with an unusual manufacturing error, matching a jacket Bundy was known to wear, were found both in the stolen FSU van he was driving and on her body.
The net was closing in rapidly.
The end came 3 days later. On February 15th, 1978, he was stopped by Pensacola police officer David Lee near the Alabama state line in a stolen vehicle. Bundy attempted to flee and fought the officer before being subdued.
In the stolen vehicle, they found a collection of IDs belonging to FSU students, 21 stolen credit cards, and items matching a disguise.
As Officer Lee transported him to jail, unaware he had captured a high-profile fugitive, he overheard Bundy make a profoundly chilling statement.
"I wish you had killed me." It betrays the depth of his despair.
Following his capture, Bundy faced the televised trials, which became a national spectacle. The Chi Omega trial in 1979 was famously the first trial ever to be nationally televised, drawing immense media attention.
And despite being represented by 5 court-appointed attorneys, Bundy insisted on playing a lead role in his own defense, even cross-examining witnesses.
Polly Nelson described this as sabotaging the defense out of grandiose delusion, his belief that his intellect alone could sway the jury.
2 elements of evidence were critical here. First, eyewitness Nita Neary placed him leaving the sorority house. Second, the forensic evidence was groundbreaking.
The bite marks.
Forensic odontologists Richard Severn and Lowell Levine testified, matching the bite marks found on Lisa Levy's body to castings of Bundy's teeth. The jury was presented with this highly specific and individualized form of evidence.
After less than 7 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Bundy. Trial judge Edward Cowart imposed 2 death sentences for the murders of Bowman and Levy.
6 months later, the second trial took place in Orlando for the Leach murder. And during the penalty phase, Bundy executed an astonishing and bizarre legal maneuver.
The courtroom marriage.
He utilized an obscure Florida law to legally marry Carol Ann Boone, who was testifying as a character witness, by declaring their marriage in court. It was a spectacle that gave him a strange sense of validation and control.
Bundy was convicted and sentenced to death a 3rd time in February 1980. This was the one that was ultimately carried out.
We should note that his relationship with Boone continued. Their daughter, Rose Bundy, was born in 1981, and reports later confirmed that Bundy's family, through bribery of prison guards, often secured intimate time for the couple.
Which only underscores his psychopathic need to manipulate the system from behind bars.
Following his convictions, Bundy began a series of detailed interviews with Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth, often speaking in the third person to create distance.
And these interviews, along with his later conversations with FBI profiler Bill Hagmaier, offer deep insight into his criminal organization.
The sources characterize him as an unusually organized and calculating criminal. His crimes were highly distributed across vast geographic areas. He was a meticulous researcher, skilled at minimizing physical evidence.
Right. His fingerprints were never found at a primary crime scene.
And we noted his preferred assault methods: blunt trauma and strangulation, relatively silent techniques. A significant challenge for law enforcement was his changeling quality, his ability to alter his appearance.
Judge Stuart Hansen Jr. observed that his expression would so change his whole appearance that there were moments that you weren't even sure you were looking at the same person.
His confessed motive was rooted entirely in possession. Sexual assault, in his view, fulfilled his need to totally possess his victims. But he admitted the ultimate possession was the taking of the life.
Followed by the physical possession of the remains. This hierarchy of control drove his actions far beyond simple violence.
And this need for permanent control manifested in profound necrophilia. He explicitly told Hagmaier and Nelson that he would revisit secondary crime scenes, often for hours, to perform sex acts with the remains until decomposition physically stopped him.
And he confessed to decapitating approximately 12 victims with a hacksaw, admitting that he kept at least one group of severed heads in his apartment for a time.
Furthermore, when trying to contextualize his actions, he cited the consumption of large quantities of alcohol as an essential component of his crimes. He claimed he needed to be extremely drunk to sedate the dominant personality.
Which, again, aligns perfectly with the pattern of externalizing responsibility.
When reviewing his pathology, psychiatric assessments were initially diverse. Dorothy Otnow Lewis initially suggested bipolar disorder or even multiple personality disorder.
But the majority consensus eventually coalesced around a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, and high psychopathy.
He was assessed at 39 out of a possible 40 on the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, the PCLR, an almost maximal score.
A score that high confirms the key traits of psychopathy. An outward charm, the intellectual ability to distinguish right from wrong, but a profound and total absence of guilt or remorse.
He famously summarized his lack of accountability by stating, "Guilt doesn't solve anything, really. It hurts you. I guess I am in the enviable position of not having to deal with guilt."
In the final hours before his execution, Bundy granted that videotaped interview to James Dobson from Focus on the Family.
He used this final public platform to claim that sexualized violence and violent pornography were the primary roots of his crimes, suggesting the FBI should surveil adult movie houses.
The statement has been widely concluded by those who knew him to be a final, calculated attempt at manipulation. Ted's bones for time scheme.
Exactly. It was a desperate attempt to shift the blame by catering to Dobson's known anti-pornography agenda, and it fundamentally contradicted what he'd told investigators like Hagmaier and Rule.
This final performance synthesized his lifelong pattern of delusion. He consistently deflected blame onto every external factor imaginable.
Grandfather, mother, alcohol, the media, society, even his victims. He maintained a delusional state, expressing genuine surprise when anyone noticed a victim was missing.
With all appeal avenues exhausted, Bundy finally agreed to speak frankly with FBI profiler Hagmaier. The night before his execution, he reviewed his final confession tally.
30 homicides across 7 states. 11 in Washington, 8 in Utah, 3 in Colorado, 3 in Florida, 2 in Oregon, 2 in Idaho, and 1 in California.
However, this confession was a cynical and incomplete transaction. He deliberately withheld many details, hoping to parlay the piecemeal information into another stay of execution.
Authorities rejected this final manipulation attempt. Detective Keppel later wrote that Bundy and he both knew the total was significantly higher, estimating the true victim count at least 50 and maybe 75.
The execution was set for January 24, 1989. He rejected a final meal, and in a phone call to his mother, he offered a final, hollow apology. "I'm so sorry I've given you all such grief, but a part of me was hidden all the time."
His final words, directed at his lawyer and minister, were, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." As the execution was carried out, hundreds of revelers gathered outside the prison, singing, dancing, and setting off fireworks.
A macabre celebration of justice served. His ashes were later scattered at an undisclosed location in the Cascade Range of Washington state, in accordance with his will.
Reviewing all this material, the lasting, chilling insight is how Bundy operated not just as a killer, but as a political and social chameleon. His exceptional organizational planning, his ability to adopt a convincing facade, the good student, the political aide, the kind coworker.
And his calculated use of ruses, often exploiting people's trust and empathy.
It allowed him to operate undetected across vast, unconnected jurisdictions for years. He exploited the very systems designed to protect citizens, demonstrating a terrifying intersection of high intellect, pathological ambition, and a complete absence of human feeling.
And as we close our session on this material, we are ultimately left with a lingering ambiguity regarding the true scale of his crimes. Bundy only confessed to 30 murders, but deliberately made cryptic comments to investigators suggesting the total was closer to 36, or perhaps much more. Considering his confessed motive of total possession and his final desire to remain the only person who knew his victims' true resting places, the precise scale of the suffering he inflicted across the American West remains a number that may never truly be known. That control, even over the knowledge of his crimes, was his final victory. Thanks for listening.